Господин председатель, Совет Безопасности ООН уже на протяжении полугода не может принять документ с требованием о прекращении огня в Газе. Все попытки раз за разом разбивались о противодействии США, которые 4 раза хладнокровно применяли в этом зале право вето. За это время мы услышали от американских коллег много разных оправданий. То они говорили, что добиваться прекращения огня преждевременно, так как надо дать пространство для контртеррористических усилий Израиля, то требовали, чтобы Совет не мешал эффективной дипломатии Вашингтона на земле, цитата, то призывали подождать наступления Рамадана, когда, мол, точно будет достигнута договоренность о прекращении насилия. Теперь, спустя полгода, когда Газу практически сравняли с землей, представитель Соединенных Штатов, не моргнув глазом, заявляет, что Вашингтон наконец начинает осознавать необходимость прекращения огня. Этот неторопливый мыслительный процесс Вашингтона стоил жизни 32 тысячам мирных палестинцев, 2/3 из которых – женщины и дети. И даже теперь мы наблюдаем типичный лицемерный спектакль, когда в обертке прекращения огня Соединенные Штаты пытаются продать членам Совета Безопасности и всему международному сообществу нечто иное, а именно размытую формулировку про определение императива прекращения огня. Такие философские пассажи про нравственные императивы органично смотрятся в трудах Иммануила Канта. Но для спасения жизни мирных палестинцев их недостаточно. И это совершенно не то, что предполагает мандат Совета Безопасности ООН, который наделен уникальным инструментарием требовать прекращения огня, а в случае необходимости принудить к его соблюдению. Госсекретарь Блинкен в ходе официального интервью в Джидде от 20 марта корреспонденту Аль-Хаддах заявил, цитирую, "Well, in fact, we actually have a resolution that we put forward right now, that's before the UN Security Council, that does call for an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of hostages, and we hope very much that countries will support that." Однако в тексте американского проекта, поставленном сегодня на голосование, такого призыва нет. Получается, что либо постоянный представитель Соединенных Штатов при ООН, либо госсекретарь Соединенных Штатов умышленно вводят международное сообщество в заблуждение. Уважаемые коллеги, с самого начала было очевидно, что переговоры, которые американские коллеги ведут по этому проекту, нацелены лишь на то, чтобы оттянуть время. Все наши комментарии и красные линии раз за разом игнорировались, как и предложения ряда других делегаций. Это был какой-то разговор с пустотой, а не нормальная работа над документом. Американский продукт – это насквозь политизированный документ, единственная цель которого – подыграть на предвыборной волне настроением избирателей, подкинув им кость в виде хоть какого-то упоминания прекращения огня, так называемого прекращения огня в Газе, застолбить политические установки США в регионе через навешивание террористических ярлыков и обеспечить безнаказанность Израиля, преступным действиям которого в проекте даже не дается оценки. Хочу обратить внимание и на то, что в американском проекте содержится фактически зеленый свет Израилю на проведение военной операции в Рафахе. По крайней мере, авторы постарались сделать так, чтобы ничто в их проекте не препятствовало Западному Иерусалиму закончить кровавую зачистку юга сектора Газа. Чего, собственно, и добивается Вашингтон. Мы уже говорили, что больше не пропустим бессмысленных резолюций, не содержащих требований прекращения огня. и ведущих нас в никуда. Этот проект не должен пройти большинством, голосами большинства членов Совета, чтобы послать сигнал о неприемлемости даже не паллиативных, а лукавных конструкций Вашингтона. Для нас будет крайне странным увидеть, если те члены Совета, а их большинство, которые понимают это и убеждали нас в дефектности американского проекта, сейчас поднимут руку в его пользу. Дамы и господа, если вы это сделаете, вы покроете себя позором. Задумайтесь еще раз, как вы будете выглядеть в глазах населения Ближнего Востока, своих собственных стран, если поддержите это лицемерное начинание, призванное дезориентировать международное сообщество и, по сути, подорвать авторитет Совета, сделав так, чтобы он гарантированно не мог повлиять на ситуацию на Земле, не смог повлиять на ситуацию на Земле и не мешался под ногами у Белого дома. Готовы ли вы подыграть ему в этом неприглядном спектакле? Россия этого делать не будет. Как постоянный член Совета Безопасности и один из основателей ООН, мы осознаем глобальную историческую ответственность за поддержание международного мира и безопасности и не можем допустить, чтобы Совет стал инструментом деструктивной политики Вашингтона на Ближнем Востоке. Если бы эта резолюция была принята, это бы окончательно закрыло дискуссию по необходимости прекращения огня в Газе, развязала бы руки Израилю и приговорила бы Газу и все ее населению к уничтожению или изгнанию. Мы в своей работе руководствуемся не тем, что угодно Вашингтону и его сателлитам, которые поднимают руку по его указке, а тем, что необходимо палестинцам и что содействует достижению мира. Призываем членов Совета Безопасности не допустить этого и проголосовать против американского проекта. Господин председатель, с тем, чтобы Совет Безопасности ООН все-таки смог реализовать свой мандат по поддержанию международного мира и безопасности, ряд непостоянных членов Совета подготовил альтернативный проект резолюции, в котором черным по белому прописаны требования как по прекращению огня, так и по безусловному освобождению заложников. Это сбалансированный и деполитизированный документ. Не видим причин, по которым члены Совбеза могут отказать ему в поддержке. Разве только если прекращение огня и освобождение заложников в их планы не входит. Это попытка дать Совету выполнить возложенные на него благородные функции. Призываем ее не упускать. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/239 please raise their hand. Those against. Abstention. The result of the voting is as follows: 11 votes in favor, 3 votes against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Colleagues, today the United States put forward a resolution in good faith after consulting with all Council members and after multiple rounds of edits. The vast majority of this Council voted in favor of this resolution. But unfortunately, Russia and China decided to exercise its veto. And now, Russia and China will give you all sorts of explanations for its obstruction. But whether or not it will admit it, there are two deeply, deeply cynical reasons behind its votes. First, Russia and China still could not bring itself to condemn Hamas's terrorist attacks on October 7th. Can we just pause on that for a moment? Russia and China refuses to condemn Hamas for burning people alive, for gunning down innocent civilians at a concert, for raping women and girls, for taking hundreds of people hostage. This was the deadliest single attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And a permanent member of this Council can't even condemn it. I'm sorry, it's really outrageous, and it's below the dignity of this body. The second reason behind this veto is not just cynical, it's also petty. Russia and China simply did not want to vote for a resolution that was penned by the United States because it would rather see us fail than to see this Council succeed. Even after inclusive consultations over weeks and weeks, even after negotiations and edits produced a draft that received overwhelming Council support. And as you saw today, nearly every Council member voted to put the full weight of this body behind the diplomatic efforts to secure an immediate and sustained ceasefire as part of a deal that leads to the release of all hostages that will allow much more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. But once again, Russia put politics over progress. Russia, who has carried out an unprovoked war on its neighbor, has the audacity and the hypocrisy to throw stones when it lives in a glass house itself. So let's be honest, for all the fiery rhetoric, we all know that Russia and China are not doing anything diplomatically to advance a lasting peace or to meaningfully contribute to the humanitarian response effort. Colleagues, there is obviously another resolution that some of you would like to be considered, but in its current form, that text fails to support sensitive diplomacy in the region. Worse, it could actually give Hamas an excuse to walk away from the deal on the table. All of us want to see this Council speak out, but we should not move forward with any resolution that jeopardizes the ongoing negotiations. And these are not just negotiations that are being carried out by the United States. Others in the region, Qatar and Egypt, are engaged on these negotiations. So if that alternative resolution comes up for a vote and does not support the diplomacy happening on the ground, we may once again find this Council deadlocked. I truly hope that that does not come about. And so for our part, the United States will keep at it. We'll continue to work toward a deal alongside Qatar and Egypt. And we will work with any Council member that is seriously interested in adopting a resolution that will help make that deal possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom voted yes on the text before us this morning. We voted yes on the need for an immediate and sustained ceasefire to protect civilians, allow humanitarian aid in, and alleviate suffering. We voted yes on the call for an international humanitarian law to be upheld, for the release of hostages, to reject forced displacement, and to urge against a ground offensive into Rafah. President, Palestinians are facing a devastating and growing humanitarian crisis, which will not improve until more aid can get in to Gaza. So we are deeply disappointed that Russia and China were unable to support this Council to clearly and unequivocally state the need for an immediate and sustained ceasefire to that end. Through this resolution, the Security Council would have, rightly and for the first time, unequivocally condemned Hamas terrorist attacks. We're disappointed that the Council was not able to send this important message due to the vetoes cast by Russia and China. We welcome the patient and constructive consultation by the United States on this text. For our part, we will continue to do everything we can to get aid into Gaza as quickly as possible by land, sea, and air. But an immediate stop in the fighting is the only way to get aid into Gaza that is so desperately needed and make progress towards a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I address to you today not only as representative of Algeria, but also as a representative of the whole Arab world. Witnessing the unfolding tragedy in Palestine, our region is devastated by the violence inflicted upon the Palestinian people. Live scenes of destruction and killing, inflicting profound suffering, are not bearable anymore. Since the beginning of the aggression against the Palestinian people, the Arab group have consistently called to put an end to this carnage. Only by ceasing hostilities we can alleviate the immense suffering and ensure that large-scale humanitarian assistance reaches those in need. For this purpose, we presented last month a draft resolution who garnered significant support within the Security Council, but it was ultimately vetoed. We firmly believe that its adoption could have saved thousands of lives of innocent people. It is beyond any doubt that Resolution 2712 and 2720 have fallen short due to the absence of a clear demand for a ceasefire. Those who believe that the Israeli occupying power will choose to uphold its international legal obligation are mistaken. They must abandon this fiction. Mr. President, since the circulation of this draft resolution over a month ago, Algeria has participated actively and in good faith in the negotiation process, proposing reasonable edit to achieve a more balanced and acceptable text. We acknowledge the effort made by the US delegation, especially Ambassador Greenfield, in accommodating some of our proposals. However, our core concerns remained unaddressed, despite the many circulated revised versions. Throughout this process, we emphasized relentlessly the urgency of an immediate ceasefire to prevent further loss of life. We echoed the demand of millions of people and humanitarian actors for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Regrettably, the draft resolution falls short of our expectations. It fails to adequately address these main issues and the immense suffering enduring by the Palestinian people. Over 5 months, the conflict in Gaza has resulted in the tragic loss of life of more than 32,000 Palestinian lives. 32,000 Palestinian lives. More than 74,000 injuries, with 12,000 suffering permanent disabilities. These are not mere statistics. They represent lives. They represent dreams. They represent hopes who have been destroyed. Alarmingly, the text avoids mentioning the responsibility of the Israeli occupying power. These individuals were not lost due to act of self-harm. They were killed. Their perpetrators must be held accountable. For us, in the Arab world, in the Islamic nation, in the whole world, Palestinians' lives undeniably matter. Mr. President, the text presented today does not convey a clear message of peace. It tacitly allows for continuing civilian casualties and lack clear safeguard to prevent further escalation. It is a laissez-passer to continuing killing the Palestinian civilian. The emphasis on measures, I quote, on measures to reduce civilian harm from ongoing and future operation implies a license for continuing bloodshed. In this context, we are particularly concerned about a potential military operation in Rafah. Such a military operation would have devastating consequences. Algeria, along with other regional countries, has actively pursued reconciliation between Palestinian factions because we trust that a united Palestine is essential for its future and the future of the peace process. We believe that specific provision within the draft resolution jeopardize the future of the Palestinian state and hinder ongoing reconciliation efforts. Building a Palestinian state requires the collective effort of all its citizens. All its citizens. And the Security Council actions should support, not impede, this process. Mr. President, UNRWA plays a vital role in assisting Palestinian refugees not only in Palestine, but also in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria. It is a tool of regional stability. Any resolution undermining UNRWA mandates would exacerbate the already dire humanitarian situation. UNRWA continuing operation is essential until Palestinian refugees are able to sustain themselves or to return home, as stipulated by international law. Mr. President, while supporting parallel efforts to end the bloodshed, this should not prevent the Council from demanding a ceasefire, a clear ceasefire to alleviate the Palestinian suffering. The Security Council duty is, by the Charter, to maintain international peace and security. It should be empowered to impose a ceasefire. For all this reason, Algeria voted against this draft resolution. Mr. President, we urge all Security Council members to prioritize the immediate cessation of hostilities. The Security Council must take decisive and meaningful action to halt the violence and pave the way for a sustainable peace process in Palestine and also in the wider region. It is still within our capacity to act, and urgently. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, la France remercie les États-Unis d'avoir proposé cette résolution en faveur de laquelle elle a voté. Ce Conseil doit continuer à agir alors que la catastrophe humanitaire à Gaza s'aggrave chaque jour davantage. La France exige la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages. Elle exige aussi un cessez-le-feu immédiat et durable. Elle soutient par conséquent les efforts de plusieurs membres élus de ce Conseil qui proposent un projet de résolution en ce sens, et elle se félicite que ce projet soutienne sans réserve les efforts en cours à Doha. La France soutient et appuie sans réserve ces efforts. Elle demande le respect intégral du droit international et des conventions de Genève. C'est une exigence absolue. La France s'oppose fermement à toute offensive israélienne à Rafah qui ne pourrait qu'aboutir à un désastre humanitaire. Il y a urgence à acheminer massivement l'aide à Gaza. Il est impératif d'ouvrir le port d'Ashdod, une voie terrestre directe depuis la Jordanie et tous les points de passage. Fidèle à ces principes, la France continuera d'appeler ce Conseil à condamner les actes terroristes et les violences sexuelles commis par le Hamas et d'autres groupes terroristes le 7 octobre. En octobre dernier, une grande majorité d'entre nous avait soutenu le projet brésilien qui dénonçait clairement ces actes. La France rappelle son attachement indéfectible à la sécurité d'Israël et sa solidarité avec le peuple israélien après ces attaques. Celle-ci ne saurait néanmoins justifier les souffrances dont les Palestiniens sont les victimes. La France continuera de s'engager en faveur d'un règlement du conflit israélo-palestinien. Elle rappelle que seule la solution des deux États est à même de répondre aux besoins de sécurité d'Israël ainsi qu'aux aspirations légitimes des Palestiniens à un État. Il est du devoir de ce Conseil de le rappeler et c'est pourquoi la France prendra ses responsabilités et va proposer une initiative au Conseil de sécurité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea voted in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the U.S., as this includes positive elements that can plant the seeds for more sustainable peace in Palestine and Israel, including support for the ongoing negotiations to achieve the release of hostages and an immediate ceasefire. The Republic of Korea reaffirms its firm position, calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, objecting to any ground operation in Rafah, and stressing the importance of the protection of civilians. Thus, we note with appreciation that the draft resolution made it clear that an immediate and sustained ceasefire is imperative to protect civilians and alleviate humanitarian suffering, and we compliment the efforts by the U.S. government to incorporate comments from the Council members. This draft resolution proposed by the U.S. contains other important elements, including support for diplomatic efforts to ensure ceasefire and the release of all remaining hostages, clear condemnation of all acts of terrorism, including the deplorable Hamas-led attacks of the 7th of October, and concern over the ground offensive into Rafah. It also demands all parties to enable the full, immediate, safe, sustained, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population throughout Gaza. In addition, it includes rejections of forced displacement, the establishment of so-called buffer zones, and new settlements in Gaza, as well as a commitment to the two-state solution. Thus, it is regrettable that another opportunity for this Council to forge a favorable response has failed to draw consensus. The Republic of Korea will continue to constructively engage with other members of this Council to reach a meaningful outcome in responding to the grave situation in Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
主席先生，中方对刚刚付诸表决的决议草案投了反对票。我愿就中方的投票立场和有关考虑说明如下：加沙冲突爆发已经160多天，面对32000多名无辜平民丧生，上百万人处于饥荒的人间惨剧，安理会最迫切需要采取的行动，是推动立即实现无条件、持久的停火。这是国际社会的普遍呼声，是紧急特别人大几个月前就做出的决定，也是联合国秘书长援引宪章第99条向安理会提出的郑重呼吁。安理会在这方面已经拖得太久，浪费了太多时间。我们都记得，美国在2月20日否决安理会常任理事国集体磋商形成的安理会成员关于立即停火的压倒性共识后，提出了自己的决议草案。过去1个月里，草案几经修改，包含了一些回应国际社会有关切的要素，但在最核心的停火问题上，始终回避躲闪。最后的案文仍然含混其辞，没有要求立即停火，甚至没有给出短期内实现停火的答案。这显然偏离了安理会成员已有共识，同国际社会的期待存在巨大落差。立即停火是拯救生命、扩大人道准入、防止更大冲突的基本前提。美方草案反而为停火设置前提，这无异于为继续杀戮开了绿灯，是不可接受的。草案在其他许多方面也很不平衡，特别是针对以色列近期多次宣称计划军事进攻拉法，草案没有明确无误地表明反对态度，这将释放一个十分错误的信号，带来严重后果。安理会的任何行动都应该经得起历史的检验，经得起良知道义的拷问。基于对维护公理正义、维护联合国宪章宗旨原则和安理会尊严的负责任态度，同时也基于阿拉伯国家对这份草案的关切和强烈不满，中国同阿尔及利亚、俄罗斯一道投了反对票。主席先生，目前摆在安理会成员面前的还有一份非常任理事国集体磋商形成的决议草案。这项草案在实现停火问题上态度鲜明，符合安理会行动的正确方向，具有现实意义。中方对此表示支持。我们希望安理会成员就此达成一致，尽快发出立即停火止战的明确信号。同其他成员一样，中方从一开始就呼吁立即释放全部人质，这也是安理会第2712号、2720号决议一再重申的要求。我们欢迎埃及、卡塔尔等国家为此开展的斡旋努力，希望所有被扣押人员早日获释。 中方拒绝美国、英国对中方投票立场的无理指责。如果美国对实现停火是认真的，就不应多次否决多项安理会决议，就不该绕了很大一个圈子，玩弄文字游戏，却在关键问题上含混不清。如果美国对实现停火是认真的，那么请对另一项明确要求停火的决议草案投赞成票，让停火得以立即实现，让巴勒斯坦人民停止遭受苦难，让人质早日回家。对美方来说，现在重要的不是语言，而是行动。无论如何，中方将继续同安理会成员和国际社会一道，为停火止战、缓解灾难、落实两国方案、实现巴勒斯坦问题全面、公正、持久解决，发挥负责任、建设性作用。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta thanks the United States for their efforts and consistent engagement on this draft resolution. Malta voted in favor of the text, and we regret that the use of the veto has prevented its adoption. We believe that this draft would have represented another important step in the right direction and would have continued to build upon resolutions 2712 and 2720. Malta remains firm in its position that an immediate and permanent ceasefire is the only avenue through which we can prevent a further deterioration and begin addressing the impact of the Israeli-Hamas war. We support and appreciate ongoing efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to negotiate a deal which allows for the release of hostages. We will continue to reiterate our call on Hamas to release all hostages safely and unconditionally. We welcome that the draft condemned the heinous Hamas terror attacks of 7th October, including the taking of hostages and sexual violence committed. We recognize that this text emphasizes concerns on a ground offensive into Rafah and the catastrophic consequences this will cause for 1.5 million, the majority of whom are women and children. However, we underline that the Council cannot be perceived to authorize any ongoing or future Israeli military operations into Rafah in any way. We stress our firm rejection of any ground offensive into Rafah and believe the draft should have had stronger and more reassuring language on this matter. We also underline the fact that a forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population from and within Gaza would amount to grave breaches of international law. Malta continues to be gravely alarmed at the ever-increasing humanitarian toll of this war, which also persists during this holy month of Ramadan. We firmly reiterate our call for Israel to ensure the immediate, safe, sustained and unhindered delivery of adequate and desperately needed aid to the people in Gaza. We must do our utmost to alleviate the suffering of the civilians in Gaza. We also repeat our call for the full implementation of resolutions 2712 and 2720. Malta remains deeply concerned about the ongoing situation in the region. We reiterate that an immediate and permanent ceasefire remains a priority to de-escalate this gravely concerning spiral of violence and regional escalation. In closing, President, Malta reaffirms its steadfast commitment to achieving comprehensive peace in the Middle East. This demands a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine, as two democratic states, peacefully coexist side by side within secure and recognized borders in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. After 5 months of war in Gaza and the horrific attacks of 7th October 2023, this Council has still not been able to adopt a text that addresses all the dimensions of the conflict in a manner that impacts the situation on the ground and upholds the rule of law. While Guyana welcomed the U.S. initiative to develop a draft resolution and the transparency with which the negotiations were conducted, we are of the view that given the length of time spent on those negotiations and certain positions consistently expressed by several delegations, the draft could have better reflected the broad-based feedback. Mr. President, dear colleagues, Guyana abstained on this draft resolution for a number of reasons, which I will elaborate. First, contrary to some media and other reports, this resolution does not call for an immediate ceasefire. Instead, we note that it, and I quote, determines the imperative for a ceasefire, end of quote, and calls for support for diplomatic efforts that are ongoing outside of the UN. While those efforts must be commended, given the responsibility and mandate of this Council, Guyana could not support a resolution that does not unequivocally call for an immediate ceasefire. Nearly 32,000 persons have been killed in Gaza since 7th October, the majority of whom are women and children. More than 74,000 have been maimed. Initial UN assessments have concluded that it would take years to clear 23 million tons of rubble and unexploded weapons scattered across Gaza. The latest IPC report projects famine between now and May 2024. In summary, this man-made disaster cannot be halted without an immediate ceasefire, and it is this Council's responsibility to unequivocally demand one, even as it acknowledged the efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. Second, the demand for a ceasefire should not be linked to or conditioned on the release of hostages. The taking of hostages is strictly prohibited under international law, and their release must be unconditional. Guyana reiterates its call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Two wrongs cannot make a right, and the Palestinian people should not be collectively punished and themselves held hostage for the crime of others. Third, in our view, this text lacked attribution in a number of key areas. While the draft includes the condemnation of Hamas for the October 7th attacks and demands they immediately grant humanitarian access to the hostages, and rightfully so, there is no attribution or demands to the Israeli authorities for what is taking place in Gaza. For example, who is responsible for 1.5 Palestinians taking refuge in Rafah, and who has announced a planned military ground offensive there? To whom is the demand for compliance with obligations under international law regarding the protection of civilians and civilian objects, humanitarian access, and the protection of humanitarian relief and medical personnel, their assets and infrastructure applicable? Who has erected and maintained the existing barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale? Who is responsible for the forcible displacement of the civilian population in Gaza? Who is preventing the use of all available routes to and throughout the entire Gaza Strip? Who does not respect the confliction and notification mechanisms? We know the answers to these questions. We have heard briefer after briefer, both from the UN system and civil society, describe the situation on the ground, explaining where the problems are and who is responsible for creating these problems. Why then were the relevant demands in the resolution not clearly addressed to the occupying power, not even once was this done. Indeed, if one were to read this resolution without background knowledge, it would be difficult to ascertain which party in this conflict is committing the atrocities in Gaza, atrocities which necessitated this draft resolution being put forward. In a resolution of 41 paragraphs, 2,036 words, the occupying power is mentioned once in the penultimate paragraph. Fourth, preambular paragraph 7 was of particular concern to Guyana. This council is the organ with the charter responsibility for addressing threats to peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. How can we endorse the idea of, and I quote, ongoing and future operations, end of quote, in Gaza, as long as measures are taken to, and I quote again, reduce significantly civilian harm, end of quote. This idea was rejected by several delegations during the course of the negotiations. In Guyana's view, this is in direct contravention of the Council's responsibility. It would set a dangerous precedent and make the Council complicit in the atrocities being committed in Gaza now and in the future. Fifth and final, we took note of the 4 paragraphs treating with the mandate of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. While we applaud the coordinator's efforts, we are of the view that the scale of efforts that would be required in Gaza after the war would warrant a key role for UNRWA, given its decades of experience in the Strip and its capacity vis-à-vis other agencies operating there. This Council has heard many times of the indispensability of UNRWA. It is the lifeline for Palestinians. We were, therefore, disappointed that the only mention of UNRWA in the draft pertained to the investigations into the allegations against a small number of its staff. Guyana, supported by several delegations, had requested an affirmation of UNRWA's important mandate in the text, but this was not taken on board. Mr. President, dear colleagues, this Council still has an opportunity to take action to end the suffering of all parties. Civilians in Gaza need a respite. Palestinians need a respite. Israelis need a respite. Both need a respite from this continuous cycle of violence and pain. That is the real window of opportunity, the strong desire by the people of Palestine and Israel for peace. Guyana is prepared to work with other Council members to respond to their needs and legitimate aspirations, including, very important, the two-state solution. This must not be postponed. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A month after our last vote, I will repeat my words. We voted for the resolution because the killing and starving of civilians in Gaza must stop, and the suffering of hostages and their families must end. We voted in favor of the resolution because we believe it is imperative for the Security Council to send a clear message that the situation in Gaza is unacceptable. We deeply regret the use of the veto by the Russian Federation and China. We thank the United States for their efforts on this draft resolution. The draft offered the Council an opportunity to follow up on several harrowing briefings that we have received in the last month. The resolution didn't include all of the elements that we would have wanted to see in the text. However, it provided us an opportunity to express ourselves on a number of particularly concerning aspects of the crisis in Gaza, and they include the importance of achieving an immediate and sustained ceasefire, the need to release hostages, a clear stance against an offensive in Rafah and its serious implications for regional peace and security, the urgency of removing roadblocks to humanitarian assistance, including the need for increased provision and distribution of humanitarian aid, the need for respect of international law and protection of civilians and civilian objects, the need for protection of humanitarian relief and medical personnel, the rejection of an attempt at territorial or demographic change of Gaza, including forced displacement, and the commitment of the Council to the vision of the two-state solution. Many of these elements have been extensively elaborated during our numerous meetings and briefings on Gaza. As emphasized on those occasions, we believe in the complementarity of all efforts, bilateral, regional, and those of the Council. We therefore once again thank the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States for their efforts in securing a deal on the ground. Slovenia is of the view that a strong signal of support from the Council to the negotiations on the ground could provide an important impetus to the process and bring us closer to lasting peace. We continue condemning the terrorist attack of Hamas on 7 October and call for the immediate and unconditional release of hostages. Hamas did set this in motion, but it didn't have to end with over 32,000 killed Palestinians, the rest of them starving, and the massive violations of international humanitarian law. War, with all its tragic consequences, is a choice, not necessity. We underscore the need for accountability and adherence to international law. And we would like to once again express our deep concern over the statements of Israeli officials regarding resettlement of the people of Gaza and reject a possible ground invasion in Rafah. We regret the Council was once again unable to send a clear signal on the need for this conflict to end, in order to then continue its work on the political solution and the vision of the two-state solution. We reiterate our call for full respect of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, of the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice and resolutions 2712 and 2720. The Council needs to demonstrate leadership in pursuit of peace. Slovenia will continue its engagement with all Council members to find a united voice from the Council. For Slovenian, Palestinian lives matter. For us, Israeli lives matter. This conflict must end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Suisse a voté en faveur du projet de résolution présenté par les États-Unis d'Amérique et regrette qu'il n'ait pas été adopté en raison du veto de 2 membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité. À la lumière de la souffrance intolérable sur le terrain, il aurait été nécessaire que le Conseil parvienne à un résultat tangible et envoie un signal de capacité d'action et d'union claire en faveur de la protection des civils. L'ensemble des membres du Conseil ont contribué aux nombreuses consultations du texte mis aux voix aujourd'hui et je remercie les États-Unis de leurs efforts. Jusqu'en dernier ressort, pourtant, la Suisse a plaidé pour rapprocher son contenu de la demande claire et concrète formulée à maintes reprises par une très grande majorité des membres de ce Conseil, de mettre en place un cessez-le-feu humanitaire immédiat et sans aucune précondition. Il est grand temps qu'une demande sans équivoque de cessez-le-feu humanitaire immédiat fasse l'objet d'un consensus au sein de ce Conseil. Au vu de la situation humanitaire catastrophique dans laquelle les civils se trouvent à Gaza, à commencer par les enfants et les centaines de milliers de déplacés en proie au bombardement, au risque de famine et d'épidémie, un tel cessez-le-feu demeure une étape prioritaire et urgentissime. La fourniture d'aide humanitaire, dont l'ensemble de la population de Gaza a aujourd'hui besoin, doit pouvoir se réaliser de manière rapide, sûre et sans entrave. Nous notons que le texte américain n'appelle pas explicitement à la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle des otages, demande qu'une grande majorité des membres du Conseil, dont la Suisse, n'a cessé de formuler depuis les actes de terreur perpétrés par le Hamas le 7 octobre dernier. La Suisse salue en revanche la condamnation de ces actes dans le texte. Enfin, la Suisse reste très préoccupée par les conséquences humanitaires des hostilités actuelles. Une large offensive militaire à Rafah aggraverait encore notablement la situation déjà catastrophique de la population civile et établirait un nouvel obstacle majeur à l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire. Une telle perspective est inacceptable et ne saurait être adoubée par ce Conseil. Aussi, l'échec d'aujourd'hui ne doit en aucun cas être interprété comme un signal lancé aux parties pour poursuivre les hostilités. Pour cette raison, la Suisse reste engagée, y compris avec les membres élus du Conseil de sécurité, pour permettre une action rapide du Conseil. Nous encourageons et remercions aussi tous les efforts de négociation en cours menés par les États-Unis, l'Égypte et le Qatar. Il reste aussi de notre devoir de veiller à ce que les obligations en vertu du droit international, notamment du droit international humanitaire et des droits humains, soient respectées par toutes les parties, en toutes circonstances, même en l'absence de résolution émanant du Conseil, afin de protéger et venir en aide aux populations civiles. La Suisse demeure engagée pour une action unifiée visant à porter fin à ce conflit et rétablir un horizon politique conformément à notre mandat de maintenir la paix et la sécurité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, today, the Security Council has considered the draft resolution presented by the United States as part of the Council's efforts to fulfill its responsibility under the Charter of the United Nations to maintain international peace and security. We acknowledge the time and effort dedicated by the United States to ensure we have a resolution that could address the current situation on the ground as it relates to the ongoing hostilities in the Gaza Strip since the attack of 7th October 2023. Despite the serious difficulties we had with some provisions of the text, Sierra Leone voted in favor of the draft resolution to demonstrate commitment to achieving a sustainable cessation of hostilities, even if incremental in approach and dependent on diplomatic negotiations outside of the United Nations. The text placed before the Council by the pen holder did not call for an unambiguous immediate ceasefire and an unconditional release of the hostages. With the unfolding catastrophe, tragic and massive scale of killings and human suffering in Gaza, Sierra Leone has committed to support initiatives that will lead to a ceasefire. Our vote, therefore, was informed by the need to support actions that could lead to an immediate and sustained ceasefire, alleviate human suffering, stop forced displacement of Palestinians, and allow for the delivery of essential humanitarian assistance, including medical supplies, water, food, beddings, and shelter. Our vote is also indicative of the urgent need for all hostages held by Hamas to be immediately released. With our vote, we underscore the urgent need for an expanded and unimpeded humanitarian assistance to civilians in the entire Gaza Strip, especially at this critical moment of acute food insecurity in the Gaza Strip and the imminent risk of famine. As a firm proponent for consistency in complying with international law, Sierra Leone welcomes the call for parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, with regard to the conduct of hostilities and protection of civilians and civilian objects. While we regret that the current text was not adopted due to the incorporation of elements that could be misinterpreted and which lacks the Council's consensus, this setback notwithstanding, as a Council, we must continue our pursuit of peace. Our quest for a solution to the ongoing catastrophic humanitarian situation is to rescue the 17,000 unaccompanied children in the Gaza Strip, over 1.4 million internally displaced persons, the wounded, women and other vulnerable groups from untimely deaths and untold suffering. Sierra Leone will continue to recognize the key role of UNRWA and all UN humanitarian agencies in providing life-saving assistance to the civilian population and offer our support to the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. When the guns are silent and we are at the critical point, it's our firm view that the people of Palestine should be given the liberty to determine their political status and future. We emphasize that all engagements regarding reconstruction of the Gaza Strip must be conducted in good faith and with the active participation of the Palestinians. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente. El Ecuador ha votado a favor del proyecto de resolución que acabamos de considerar, pues comparte el sentido de urgencia de que el Consejo actúe ante la catastrófica situación humanitaria de la población civil en Gaza, al borde de la hambruna y el riesgo de la expansión de la violencia a otros lugares, lo que podría acarrear también consecuencias catastróficas. Hemos votado a favor de una resolución que es el fruto de un largo proceso de negociación en el que han participado todos los miembros del Consejo. Es, sobre todo, una resolución en la que el Consejo no solo determina que es necesario un cese al fuego inmediato, sino que contiene otros elementos de gran importancia, relevancia y urgencia, incluyendo a mediano y largo plazo, con miras a lograr una paz duradera. El texto incluye además una condena explícita a los actos terroristas de Hamás y a la toma de rehenes. El Ecuador reitera la demanda de que estos rehenes sean liberados inmediato e incondicionalmente. Señor presidente, estoy seguro de que cada uno de nosotros, miembros de este Consejo, consideramos que el texto podría ser mejorado, pero también estoy completamente seguro de que no todos coincidiremos en cuál es la parte por mejorar ni en cómo hacerlo. En una situación tan compleja, un texto perfecto para todos es imposible. Señor presidente, el Consejo no debe ser arena de rivalidades geopolíticas. Debe ser un espacio para construir la reconciliación y la paz, en el marco de un mandato claramente establecido en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Por eso, una vez más, lamento que no se respete una decisión mayoritaria del Consejo debido al uso del veto. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I shall make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Japan. Over 5 months have passed since Hamas' horrifying acts of terror took place in Israel, which has led to the unfolding of the tragedies the world has been witnessing in Gaza. At least 32,000 Palestinians have been reportedly killed by Israel in Gaza, most of them women and children. Famine is on the brink, and the looming Israeli military offensive into Rafah only threatens to deepen the humanitarian catastrophe. This should not proceed under any circumstances. Given the gravity of the situation on the ground, Japan voted in favor of this draft resolution. We deeply regret that it failed to be adopted. Japan appreciates the tireless efforts of the United States in consulting with all Council members throughout the negotiation process. Had it been adopted, this resolution could have pushed forward ongoing vigorous diplomatic efforts, in particular the four-party talks, towards an immediate and sustained ceasefire and the release of hostages. We believe that this would be a pragmatic approach to improve the humanitarian situation on the ground. Although we were unable to adopt the resolution, the Council must put pressure on the parties to conclude a deal as soon as possible. Those in Gaza and beyond cannot wait another day. I thank you. I resume my function as President of Council. The permanent representative of Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them a floor.
Господин председатель, мы сейчас слушали лицемерные речи некоторых членов Совета, проливавших крокодиловые слезы по поводу российского и китайского вето. Мы объяснили причины, почему мы не пропустили эту резолюцию. И это вовсе не потому, что ее выдвинула делегация Соединенных Штатов, как сегодня американский поспред нас пытался в этом заверить. Я вам сказал, тем, кто сегодня голосовал здесь, что вы покроете себя позором, проголосовав за американский текст, который был для вас, включая тех, кто его сейчас нахваливает, неприемлем. Хотите, я вам скажу, как было дело на самом деле? Об этом нетрудно догадаться, сценарий совсем не сложный. Ваши американские сюзерены, помимо того, что они выкручивали руки вашим руководителям по столицам, сказали вам не стоит волноваться, Россия все равно заветирует этот текст. Зато вы не пойдете против американского текста. Вот и все, вот и весь сценарий. Поэтому не надо нам здесь сейчас лицемерно убеждать о том, как вы расстроены, о том, что Россия и Китай заветировали эту резолюцию. Еще раз говорю, вы сегодня себя покрыли позором, проголосовав за текст, который вы сами не поддерживали. И не поддерживаете на самом деле.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the United States of America. The United Nations was established in the wake of the Holocaust to prevent such atrocities from happening again. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, thank you for defending these values. Your determination to condemn the Hamas monsters and your conviction that the release of the hostages is not something that can be postponed shows true moral clarity. The American resolution, should it have passed, would have marked a moment of morality for the UN, a place where good is evil and justice is injustice. It would have been the very first time that this Council, or any UN body, condemned Hamas and their brutal massacre. Yet, sadly, for purely political reasons, this resolution did not pass, and terrorists can continue benefiting from this Council whitewashing their crimes. Colleagues, how can we explain to children around the world that the body mandated to uphold global peace and security refuses to condemn terrorists for the most horrific crimes? The Council's decision to not condemn Hamas is a stain that will never be forgotten. Colleagues, as Israel defends its very future against those that seek our annihilation, all UN bodies have dedicated their discussions only to the situation in Gaza and the civilian casualties. Numbers supplied by the terrorists are thrown around and quoted as if they are word of God. Yet, in essence, these numbers are merely the lies of Hamas that the UN is so quick to parrot. The time has come to put an end to this myth. Hamas knows that they cannot defeat Israel militarily. Their goal is to annihilate Israel, and their strategy is to terrorize our civilians while weaponizing the international community to tie our hands in order to ensure their survival. And how do they do it? They use Gazans as human shields in an effort to maximize civilian casualties, knowing that it will lead this Council to pressure Israel into ending the military operation. Remember, please remember, for Israel, every civilian death is a tragedy. For Hamas, civilian deaths are a strategy. And sadly, you are playing into Hamas's strategy exactly as they predicted. Israel is a law-abiding democracy. We take every effort to minimize collateral damage. Israel has gone above and beyond to ensure the safety of civilians. We drop warning leaflets, make tens of thousands of phone calls, and provide Gazans with military maps detailing safe corridors. Israel has taken steps that no other military in any other conflict has ever taken, all in order to mitigate civilian casualties. Hamas, on the other hand, built for years hundreds of miles of terror tunnels in which terrorists hide and our hostages are held. Why do they do it? Hamas does exactly this in order to exploit Gazan civilians as human shields and to increase the death toll. For Hamas, more murdered civilians is key to their survival. It's their path towards a ceasefire that will keep them in power. So ask yourself if you're not helping them with their strategy. So Hamas, through the Gaza Ministry of Health that it controls, provides false statistics, which are then parroted around the globe, promoting the lies of terrorists. By merely only looking at the Hamas numbers, it is crystal clear that they cannot represent reality. A statistic professor from Wharton Business School recently released an analysis of the Gaza Ministry of Health numbers proving that not only are they distorted, but they are also inflated. They have no possible basis in reality. But even if we were to take Hamas's falsified numbers at face value, the non-combatant to combatant ratio in Gaza is roughly 1-to-1. This is the lowest ratio in the history of urban warfare. Every civilian death in Gaza, as I said, is tragic, but the only party to blame is Hamas. Yet the Security Council refused to hold Hamas accountable for deliberately putting Gazans in the line of fire. Condemn the tunnel under schools. Condemn the exploitation of hospitals for terror. Hold Hamas accountable. The same can be said about the libelous narrative of famine in Gaza. This too is Hamas propaganda which the UN has chosen to embrace. There is absolutely no limit that Israel places on humanitarian aid entering Gaza. And to date, 300,041 tons of aid on over 18,283 trucks have entered the Strip. Any country that wishes to provide more aid is more than welcome, and we will facilitate its entry. The only reason why any Gazan lacks aid is because Hamas loots it and steals much of it for themselves. As long as Hamas is in control, Gaza's economic situation will be in ruin. Colleagues, this Council has expressed its concern over an operation in Rafah. But let me be clear. There is no country that seeks to avoid an operation in Rafah more than Israel. Is it your sons and daughters that you are sending into battle? No, it is our children who are making the ultimate sacrifice in defense of their homeland. From the outset of the war, Israel's goals have been clear. Return the hostages, dismantle Hamas's terror capabilities, and ensure that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. So far, Israel has succeeded in dismantling roughly 18 of Hamas's battalions, but there are 4 remaining battalions in Rafah, with around 8,000 terrorists. Israel is fighting for her future, and if we fail to achieve our goals, Hamas will repeat October 7th again and again, as they promised publicly. Not only Hamas, by the way. Terror will prevail in our region, and this will inspire jihadist organizations all across the globe. So the only way to achieve a real and permanent ceasefire is to eliminate Hamas's capabilities entirely. And this cannot happen unless all of their battalions are demolished. You cannot extinguish a fire by putting out most of it. The fire will grow again and spread. This is what will happen without an operation in Rafah. Israel sees no alternative. The road to a permanent ceasefire passes through Rafah. If this Council has any other ideas how to dismantle the terror group without entering Rafah, we would love to hear them. We are open. Colleagues, once Hamas capabilities are dismantled, Israel's goal to demilitarizing Gaza can materialize. But for a lasting solution between Israel and Gaza, there is another requirement: de-radicalization. According to a recent poll by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey, the Palestinian Center Research, 71%, I repeat, 71% of Palestinians support Hamas's October 7th massacre. It's not only a minister saying this or that, as you quote here. 71% of the Palestinian people support the massacre. And over 60% of Palestinians want to see Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip. Can you comprehend this? The vast majority of Palestinians support Hamas's massacre and wish to keep these rapist murderers in power. This, colleagues, is the root of the problem. Whoever ignores this deep-seated hatred and makes demands of Israel, only Israel, by the way, is burying their head in the sand like an ostrich, just as the UN has done since Israel disengaged, withdrew from Gaza in 2005. For 18 years, the UN has turned a blind eye to Hamas's bigotry, incitement, and radical indoctrination to terror that is rampant in schools across Gaza, by the way, including in UNRWA schools. We hear calls for two states, for peace, yet the UN refuses to address the underlying issue. The vast majority of Palestinians are not looking for peace. What is most important to them is Israel's annihilation at any cost. This is why de-radicalization is key. By making one-sided demands of Israel without making any demands of the Palestinians to end their culture of hate and incitement, a long-term solution will never be possible. Demand that the Palestinian Authority combat terror. Demand that they end incitement. Demand that they stop paying salaries to terrorists. Demand that they de-radicalize the people. The educational transformation that the German people underwent after the Third Reich was toppled is what the Palestinians need to receive so that they finally support coexistence. Coexistence with Jews, coexistence with Israel. That's how we educate our kids. Mr. President, the war may be in Gaza, but this war extends much further than our battle against Hamas. The true puppet master directing Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of them to attack us and their militias is, as you all well know, is Iran. Iran is the architect of instability, and its ambitions of world domination must be stopped. The Ayatollah regime is determined to wipe Israel off the map, and they are not ashamed to say it publicly. Tomorrow, dear colleagues, the Jewish people will celebrate the holiday of Purim. And this holiday is a very important message to the murderous Ayatollah regime and the rest of the world. 1,500 years ago, in Persia, which is modern-day Iran, the king signed a disastrous decree, a resolution calling to annihilate all the Jews in his empire. Following this catastrophic decision, the Jewish people banded together, and through conviction and faith, they succeeded in reversing this resolution, gaining the right of self-defense. As a result, the Jewish people defeated all those who set out to murder them, and the man behind this evil plot was executed. This is the story of Purim, our holiday, and the holiday's slogan is V'nahafochu, and the opposite happened. Those who plotted against the Jewish people had their own schemes turned against them. This is the essence of Jewish history. The very same faith and conviction that the Jews of Persia displayed has been carried with us to this day. This is why we have survived and thrived, despite all of the decrees and racist resolutions against us throughout history. Many have tried to destroy us, but all have failed, because we will never surrender and we will always fight for our existence. Members of this council called for a ceasefire in honor of the Muslim holiday of Ramadan. We respect Ramadan, but Hamas's massacre was carried out on the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, the holiday where we mark the completion of the reading of the Old Testament, the Torah. So today, in order of Purim, the request of the Jewish people is that this council takes real and active measures to release all of our hostages. And if we are successful, if the hostages return home and Hamas is dismantled, then just as it says in the Megillah, the text that we read on Purim, LaYehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. The Jewish people had light and joy, gladness, happiness, and honor for us and all humanity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
الدولي لكي يبت مجلس الأمن، ونأمل بالإيجاب برفع التوصية بالموافقة على طلب دولة فلسطين الذي قدم عام 2011 إلى الأمين العام وحول إلى مجلس الأمن كي تصوت الجمعية العامة بأغلبية الثلثين على إدخال فلسطين عضواً كامل العضوية في الأمم المتحدة. هذه بعض المسائل التي نحن منهمكين فيها، وعلى ضوء الفيتو وما سيتمخض عن مجلس الأمن بالنسبة للمشروع الآخر حول وقف إطلاق نار في رمضان، سنحدد الخطوات اللاحقة. بطبيعة الحال سيكون هناك نقاشا في الجمعية العامة حول مجلس الأمن وما يتمخض من قرارات أو فشل قرارات باستعمال الفيتو، حيث سيتم مناقشة كل ذلك في الجمعية العامة، كما أن خيار استئناف الدورة الطارئة العاشرة ماثلا أمامنا. نناقش كل هذه المسائل وسنحيطكم علما أول بأول فيما سنقرر عليه. هذا السؤال الأخير.
سعيد السفير ياسر نور الدين، القاهرة الإخبارية. خالص التعازي لسيادتك وللشعب الفلسطيني على أرواح الشهداء اللي بتزهق كل يوم. برأيك يعني كيف ترى هذه البلطجة الإسرائيلية والقتل الوحشي اليومي على الأبرياء من الفلسطينيين، برغم أن المجتمع الدولي الآن يعني بيشجب هذا، وحتى أن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية قدمت اليوم هذا المشروع؟ كذلك كيف ترى الجهود العربية الدبلوماسية الممثلة في مصر وقطر والإمارات والسعودية على سبيل المثال؟
يعني أنت سألت أسئلة كثيرة. نحن أولا نقدر الوقفة الأخوية الصلبة والموحدة للمجموعة العربية بكل أعضائها وكل أركانها، وكذلك يعني نقدر الخطوات والجهود التي تقوم بها دول شقيقة كمصر وقطر في موضوع المفاوضات بشأن التبادل. وكذلك يعني نحن على علم بالاجتماعات المكثفة بما فيها للجنة السداسية، سواء الاجتماعات التي وقعت في المملكة العربية السعودية أو التي وقعت مؤخرا في مصر في القاهرة. هذه الجهود التي ركزت على وقف العدوان على شعبنا أولا، والأهداف الثلاثة التي أعلنت منذ بداية العدوان، بالإضافة إلى وقف العدوان أي وقف إطلاق النار وتوفير الإمكانيات والمساعدات الإنسانية بالحجم المطلوب وفق احتياجات شعبنا، والتصدي للتهجير القسري الداخلي والخارجي للشعب الفلسطيني، والتصدي لعدم اجتياح إسرائيل لرفح. كل هذه المسائل بالإضافة لمسائل أخرى، وهذه الجهود المكثفة وجهود الأشقاء في الجزائر الذين نحييهم من هذا الموقع، لأنهم يمثلون في مجلس الأمن على أحسن وجه ويلعبون دورا واضحا وحازما وأمينا على الموقف العربي. عبروا عنهم في كلمتهم، عبروا عنه في تصويتهم، وعبروا عنه في المسيرة المستمرة حول المشروع القرار الآخر الذي ندعمه بشكل كامل. فهذه يعني بعض من الجهود العربية التي نثمنها، ونحن يعني ننظر بألم لهذه المذابح والمجازر التي ترتكبها إسرائيل، التي يجب أن يلاحق المسؤولين ويساءلوا من الجانب الإسرائيلي الذين يعطوا الأوامر لتنظيم هذه المذابح والذين يمارسوا هذه المذابح ضد الشعب الفلسطيني في انتهاك واضح للشرعية الدولية وقرارات والقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني والقرارات التي اتخذتها محكمة العدل الدولية بشأن القرارات الاحترازية لحماية الشعب الفلسطيني من العدوان الإسرائيلي، ال6 قرارات احترازية التي لم تنفذها إسرائيل. You are the last one, young lady.
So, Shukran. Karine Otten from Le Monde. I have 2 questions. First question is towards the Gazawi people. I've heard your position, I've heard the Algerian ambassador position, but we've also listened to so many doctors, so many humanitarians this last month describing such a dire situation in Gaza. How can you explain, again, your position today when this ceasefire was not perfect, definitely in this resolution this morning, but your position? Second question, if this afternoon we don't go, if the vote on the ceasefire for Ramadan is not voted, do you think it will be the same regret as the American must have had with not vetoing the Brazilian resolution a couple of months ago?
Well, first of all, let's hope that the other resolution will be adopted. We sincerely hope that it will be adopted. We know that it will garner somewhere between 13 to 14 votes in favor, and we hope that the other country to show sincerity about a ceasefire by not blocking it. We will find out this afternoon or the latest tomorrow morning. Concerning, the resolution that was not adopted today, actually it is not calling for a ceasefire. It expresses the urgencies of a ceasefire connected with the negotiation and the release of the hostages. So therefore, it is not a crystal clear call for a ceasefire as it is reflected in the resolution of the countries from the E10. So we need to speak about these things with clarity and not to add a spin to them. Now, with regard to UN agencies, including doctors and others, all of them, led by the Secretary General, have been calling for a long time for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Unfortunately, the Security Council is not listening to them and is not implementing their desire and their call of a humanitarian ceasefire. We are listening to them. We appreciate what they're doing, and we support their call, and we hope that the Security Council would listen as well. Thank you very much.